Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I found interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 27th of April 1924, Americans don't like immigration, the Ultonians don't like the Irish, and shop window displays don't like lorries. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. The British Empire exhibition has opened at Wembley, amongst much fanfare. The Times has celebrated the event with a 32-page supplement. A conference between the British, Irish and Northern Irish governments has broken up without agreement on what the border should be between Ireland and Ulster. It now looks like a boundary commission will be set up to decide the issue. Spoiler alert, it won't. There's something called the Soldiers' Bonus Bill going through the US Congress at the moment. Essentially, it puts money in the hands of First World War veterans. Essentially and expensively, President Coolidge is threatening to veto the measure. A US president being concerned about the country's financial solvency. Weird. 253 cases of sleepy sickness were reported in England and Wales over the course of the previous week. This was a disease that in most cases turned people into statues. It disappeared in the 1930s. The cause remains unknown. Karl Helfferich, the German finance minister at the time of the hyperinflation last year, has died in a train crash in Switzerland. It is remarkable how many people associated with the hyperinflation are by this time dead. Hugo Stinnes, who used the opportunity to buy up most of Germany, died the other week, while Rudolf Havenstein, the chief of the central bank, died last October. By the way, a little bit of train nerdery here. The train involved was the Zurich to Milan Express, drawn by an electric locomotive drawing its power from an overhead line. Although Britain at this time does have some overhead lines, see the 11th of February 1923 episode, they are not on the main line. Britain will not get its first mainline electrification until, I think, the 1930s, and that will be using the third rail. Mainline electrification, the proper way, using overhead wires, will not come to Britain until 1966. It's worth dwelling for a moment on precisely why the Ulster-Ireland border is so contentious. Before 1918, border determination was simple. You had a war and the victor determined where the border should be. But in 1918, US President Woodrow Wilson came up with his doctrine of self-determination. The majority should decide which state they should be part of. That, of course, generates two problems. The first is over what territory do you hold your vote? When it comes to Ulster, the Irish are clear. The island of Ireland is the territory. The Ulstermen, not surprisingly, disagree. For the time being, they are sticking to the six-county Ulster. The second problem with this is that even if you stick with the smallest territory, let's say in the case of Ulster, county, you are going to end up with substantial minorities on the wrong side of the border. You may also end up with a border lacking in natural obstacles and is therefore difficult to defend. I know at this point someone's going to say, or at least think, but the ancient province of Ulster was 9 counties, not 6. Big deal. I have never seen why borders should be determined by dead people. An article published in Saturday's edition illustrates one of the problems with people ending up on the wrong side of the border. A campaign for the release of political prisoners in Ireland and elsewhere was inaugurated last night by a public meeting in Bermondsey Town Hall. Mr. George Hicks, Labour Defence Counsel, presided. Mr. Cahir Healy, MP, wrote saying that it was a great scandal that 300 men should be kept in custody for 2 years in a time of peace. Without the generous subsidies voted by the Labour government, that could not be done. Just to be sure, these are not political prisoners as Cahir Healy of Sinn Féin would have you believe. They are not imprisoned for their beliefs. They are people who the Northern Irish state believes either are or might be involved in terrorist activity. Nowadays, locking people up without trial in this way is known as internment, but it does illustrate the problems you get when people end up on the wrong side of the border. I saw this in Wednesday's edition. Children lost on Hampstead Heath on Monday, that was Easter Monday, numbered 107. All were claimed later. As mentioned before, the UK, then as now, is in the midst of a housing crisis. Very few houses are being built. Ernest Bain, later founder of the Society for Individual Freedom, in a letter to the Times, made the case that the root of the problem was not the free market but government intervention, in the course of which he mentioned that there were 390 Acts of Parliament affecting housing. I suspect there is some overcounting, or that half of those acts go back to the reign of Richard II or something, but even so, that is a lot of government interference, and given that in 1924 there is still a housing crisis, suggests that all that legislation is not particularly effective. I saw this in Friday's edition. During excavations at the corner of Stonecutter Street and Farringdon Street, a number of human bones and skulls have been found. Several small shops have been pulled down, and the bones and skulls were discovered in the cellars some 15 feet below the ground level. Living in central London may be risky, but travelling by train, if the Railway Companies Association is to be believed, is not. This is a statement from them published in Saturday's edition. In 1923, there was only one train accident in Great Britain in which passengers lost their lives, the number being 2, while in the previous year only 5 passengers were killed. Since the opening of the present century, there have been 2 years, 1901 and 1908, without a single fatality to passengers, and in 1900 and 1917 respectively, only 1 fatal accident occurred. In 1914, 1918 and 1920 there were 2, and in 1902, 1904, 1911, 1916, 1919 and 1922 there were 3 in each of the years named, while only thrice since 1900 have there been more than 5 fatalities in train accidents. The statement somehow fails to mention 1915, in which over 200 people died at Quintin's Hill. Compared with the ever-present peril of the London streets, in which 667 persons were killed last year, or the heavy death roll of 2,768 on the roads of Great Britain, a journey by train to hundreds of millions of people is practically without risk. Rather depends on how many journeys are being made, but I shouldn't think 1,000 road journeys are being made for every rail journey. Also, that figure of 2,768 may well be an underestimate. I'd also be curious to know where it comes from. The government didn't start publishing figures until 1926. There are other problems with the roads. This is from Thursday. The vibration set up by heavy motor traffic causes piles of goods in shop windows to collapse. Shelves fall off their brackets, and shop windows are broken. This federation is constantly receiving complaints from mutual societies in all parts of the country as to the expense incurred, which means heavier premiums for the whole body of shopkeepers to pay. It may be said that tradesmen must adapt their window dressing arrangements to modern conditions, but that is not a complete answer and will not prevent windows being broken. The houses were not built to stand the strain of present-day traffic in the streets. And that's from a Mr. H.J. Rigdon, Honorary Secretary of the Federation of Plate Glass Insurance Societies. Of course, this is not a problem today, and I wonder why not. Better suspensions, pneumatic rather than solid tyres, bypasses, pedestrianisation, stronger glass. It's certainly not because all the old buildings have been knocked down. As mentioned last week, Congress's determination to end Japanese immigration to the US is causing anger in Japan and consternation in the US State Department. But why is Congress so determined? The Times attempts to explain. This is from Saturday. The inflow from the British Isles will be less reduced than that from any other land except Japan. For the Japanese being in practice already excluded, the new bill will make no material difference. It is not claimed by any responsible American that the Japanese have failed to act up to the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907, whereby they undertook voluntarily to stop the flow of coolie labour from Japan to the United States. For the last 17 years, only students, authors, genuine travellers, and 1 or 2 other categories have been allowed to enter. How are they stopping it? Short of having an official at the departure point, barring embarkation to anyone who looks too working class, I don't see how. And what, I wonder, is the difference between coolie labour and any other form of labour? The Senate, in agreement with the House of Representatives, is determined to bang, bolt and bar the door in the face of the Japanese. The Times discusses Congress's motivations. Economic rivalry is one of the two main reasons why Americans favour the exclusion of Asiatics. The other is even more powerful. A deep racial instinct impels the Americans to keep America a white man's land, so far as is humanly possible. There are already, of course, millions of Negroes in the country, and since children born in the United States become, ipso facto, American citizens, there is a nucleus of Japanese growing up in the West who can only be deprived of their citizenship by a retroactive change in the American Constitution. But profound racial differences divide the Asiatic from the Americanized European. Other races, drawn from diverse parts of Europe, mingle easily, intermarry, and after a generation or two appear to conform to a certain pattern, and to fuse their original characteristics in a common American type. Not so the Asiatics. They remain unassimilable. Remember, O YouTube censor, these are the Times' words, not mine. Also notice how race seems to be being used at one time to mean nationality, and at another to mean a visible characteristic. The reasons which prompt America to diminish the quota of European immigrants are of course not racial, but partly economic and partly political. When the normal inflow of foreign labour was cut off by the Great War, American labour found that its position was greatly improved, and it wishes to consolidate the benefit. During the war period also, American public opinion was made sharply conscious of the fact that the peoples of Central, Southern and Eastern Europe were apt to impart those anarchistic and radical doctrines which are so specially abhorrent to it. In 1920, after a wave of bombings, the US government arrested and deported over 500 immigrants believed to be sympathetic to the bombers. Before 1890, immigrants had come far more from Northern Europe than from elsewhere, and America wishes to restore the proportion of those days. So much for the melting pot. More trouble for Calvin Coolidge, the President. Although, if a profile of him published on Tuesday is to be believed, I think he'll be just fine. The Yankee is the special product of New England, and Mr. Coolidge is the archetype. Note archetype, not archetype. Cool, cautious, prudent, economical of speech as of money, saving, thrifty, close, narrow, shrewd, wary, slow-thinking, and not given to making commitments. He is the indigenous product of his Vermont hills. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.